A loud crash echoed through the opulent office, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Amira Nascimento, the quiet secretary, froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't meant to knock over the stack of papers, but as the documents scattered across the floor, a sharp sting of panic took over her. She bent down to gather the papers, her fingers trembling, but it was too late. She could already feel the weight of his angry gaze burning into her. Damon Nguvu, the powerful billionaire, looked at her from behind his massive desk. His expression was unreadable. His jaw clenched in that way it always did when he was annoyed. He had been distant for weeks, no longer the charming, charismatic man he once was. Instead, he was cold, an empty shell of the man who had once dominated Nuvia City's business world. But she couldn't focus on that now. She had to get these papers back in order before he exploded. Her hands shook as she reached for a file near his foot, and for a split second, her fingers brushed against his trousers. It was nothing, just a fleeting touch, a simple accident, but it made Damon's heart skip a beat. Something strange, something forgotten, stirred deep within him. It was impossible. He'd been dead inside for 5 years. But now, here, in this moment, something flickered in his chest, something that had long since been extinguished. His breath caught in his throat. He blinked, hoping the sensation would go away, but it only grew stronger. Amira didn't notice. She was too focused on gathering the papers, her back hunched with shame, her head low. She was so plain, so ordinary, that Damon had never truly seen her. Yet now, in this moment, he couldn't take his eyes off her. A heavy silence hung in the air. Amira, unaware of what had just happened, finished picking up the last of the scattered documents and stood up. Her eyes stayed glued to the floor, too frightened to look at him. She was a nervous wreck, always was. She wasn't like the other women Damon had known. Women who were confident, beautiful, and, most importantly, ambitious. She was poor, modest, submissive, nothing like the women he had once surrounded himself with. And yet, in this moment, she had stirred something in him that no one else had been able to. But hey, before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss out on more intense stories like this. Stick with us to the end. I promise you won't want to miss what's coming. Amira, he said, his voice rough, but quieter than she expected. He paused. Leave. His words sliced through the air, but the strange sensation inside him didn't fade. Instead, it lingered, a gnawing feeling he couldn't explain. He watched her move toward the door, her footsteps light and cautious. But then, just as she reached the door, she stumbled. One of her worn-out shoes caught on the edge of the rug, and before she could recover, the papers flew from her hands once again. This time, she gasped, her face pale with panic. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." Her apology died in the air as Damon stood up abruptly, the anger rising in his chest once again. He was about to yell at her, to call her a fool. But then he saw it. The way she held herself, the fear in her eyes, and the way she scurried to fix her mistake. His chest tightened, and he found himself caught between the anger he was so accustomed to and something else. Something softer, something unfamiliar. For a moment he simply stared at her. He felt a strange pull in his gut. She was nothing special, just a secretary. But in that instant, something shifted inside of him. He opened his mouth, ready to lash out, but instead he said, "Get out." She paused, confused, then quickly gathered the last of the papers and scrambled to leave, her hands shaking. The door clicked softly behind her. Damon remained in his office, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His mind was racing. His heart pounded as if it had just been jolted awake. What had just happened? He stood there, staring at the door. His body was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. A ghost of a feeling, one he hadn't recognized, lingered inside him. Felt like hope, but it couldn't be hope. Not after all this time. He was broken. He had been broken for 5 years. He sat back down in his chair, running a hand over his face. The familiar, empty ache was there, the one he had become used to, but the flicker from earlier still burned in his chest, refusing to be ignored. Damon stared out at the city through the massive glass window behind him. Nuvia City, his city. He had conquered it all, luxury, power, control. But inside he was a hollow man. 5 years ago he had been at the peak of his life, wealthy, influential, and thriving. But then it all came crashing down. His condition, a curse as he called it, had taken away everything. His strength, his confidence, his vitality. What good was power when you couldn't feel alive? Doctors had no answers. Specialists from around the world told him the same thing. He was perfectly healthy. But no one understood. No one could explain why his body betrayed him. He had once been the lion of the business world. Now he was a ghost watching his empire from the shadows. His wife, Isabella, had tried to help. She suggested doctors, treatments, traditional remedies, anything to fix him. But the longer it went on, the more distant she became. She was no longer the beautiful, loving wife he had married. She was a society queen, attending events, mingling with the rich and powerful. Her concern for him had shifted into frustration and resentment. They still shared a massive bed, but it was as if they were strangers. Two people lying together, separated by an invisible wall. Damon had tried everything. He'd secretly brought different women to his penthouse, hoping one of them could reignite something in him. Young women, old women, actresses, models. It didn't matter. Nothing worked. His manhood, once his greatest asset, had become a dead weight. And the shame gnawed at him. He couldn't let anyone know. He couldn't allow the world to see that the great Damon Nguvu, the king of Nuvia City, was nothing more than a shell. The next day, as Damon sat in his office, reviewing yet another failed deal, he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. His employees scurried in and out of his office, fearing his wrath. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to care. Another failure. A soft knock on the door broke his train of thought. "What is it?" he barked, his voice rough. The door opened slowly, and Amira stepped inside. She was carrying his coffee, her eyes fixed on the floor. "You have a meeting with the investors from Dubai in 30 minutes, sir," she said, her voice soft. "And your coffee, sir?" Amira's voice was quiet, but there was something about her. Something that set her apart from the rest of his staff. She was efficient, meticulous, and always careful. She never looked him in the eye, and she never made mistakes. He barely noticed her most of the time. But today something was different. Her presence felt almost calming. She placed the steaming mug of coffee on his desk, her hand shaking slightly. Damon's eyes flickered to her hand, noticing the way it trembled. He grunted, not looking at her. "Leave it," he said, dismissing her. But just before she turned to leave, her worn-out shoe caught on the rug, and she stumbled. A stack of papers flew into the air, scattering all over the floor. Amira froze, her face pale with panic. "I'm sorry, sir," she muttered, scrambling to gather the papers. Damon's anger flared once again. He opened his mouth to yell, but then something stopped him. That same strange feeling from yesterday, the flicker, was back. As she reached for a paper near his leg, her fingers brushed against his trousers once more. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but to Damon it was like an electric shock. A surge of energy he hadn't felt in years. His breath caught in his throat. He stood there, motionless. He had to know. He had to test it. "Get out," he whispered. Amira's eyes widened with confusion and fear, but she hurriedly gathered the last of the papers and scrambled to leave, her hands shaking. The door clicked softly behind her. Damon stayed in his chair, staring at the door. He could still feel the strange sensation pulsing in his chest. What was happening to him? Damon Nguvu sat in his massive office, his chair creaking under the weight of his thoughts. He hadn't moved in what felt like hours. His gaze remained fixed on the door where Amira had just left. The flicker inside him hadn't disappeared. No, it was stronger now, more persistent, like a fire that had been kindled in the coldest part of him. A fire he couldn't ignore. What had just happened? He had been numb for 5 years, And then this woman, this plain secretary, had somehow brought him to life. A touch, a brief brush of her fingers against his trousers, and suddenly, everything felt different. But why? It didn't make sense. His mind raced, but he couldn't come up with an explanation. He had to know more. He had to see if it was real. Standing up abruptly, Damon walked toward the large glass wall that separated him from the rest of his employees. From here, he could see everything, his empire, the workers, the world he controlled. But for the first time in years, none of it seemed to matter. He watched Amira at her desk, her head bent low in concentration as she typed. Her hands, the ones that had touched him, moved swiftly across the keyboard. She was so small, so ordinary, nothing special. But why couldn't he stop thinking about her? Why did he feel this inexplicable pull toward her? He had been through so much, so many women, so many nights spent trying to forget his condition, trying to feel like a man again. But none of them had ever made him feel anything. Not like this. Amira was different. She was a secret he couldn't unravel. Damon's pulse quickened. He needed to get closer to her, needed to test this feeling again. But how? Later that day, Damon made his move. He sent out a company-wide email, informing everyone that due to urgent server maintenance, all employees were to leave the building by 5 p.m. sharp. The message was clear, no exceptions. A small buzz of excitement rippled through the office as workers packed their things and headed for the elevators. But there was one exception, Amira. She remained at her desk, packing her things slowly, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She probably thought she wouldn't be coming back tomorrow. Damon's plan was simple. He needed her to be alone. He needed to see if this feeling was real. 5 minutes later, the office floor was empty. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Damon sat in his office, waiting, his eyes never leaving the door. His heart raced in anticipation, but his face remained calm, like a predator watching its prey. Amira stood up from her desk, hesitating for a moment before she walked toward his office. Damon pressed the intercom button, his voice steady, betraying none of the chaos inside him. "Amira," he called. She stopped in her tracks, her eyes flickering toward the door of his office. "Yes, sir?" Her voice was small, hesitant. "Come in here," Damon ordered. "Close the door behind you." The sound of her footsteps grew louder as she approached. The door creaked as it swung open, and Amira stepped inside. She closed the door behind her, the click echoing in the silence. Damon didn't speak for a moment, just watched her, his eyes scanning her every move. Amira stood there, hands clasped in front of her, her eyes fixed on the floor. Damon leaned against his desk, arms folded across his chest. He was careful, calculated, but there was a fire burning inside him that he could no longer control. "Sit," he said, his voice low. Amira hesitated before sitting in the chair across from him, her eyes still not meeting his. Damon watched her closely, trying to steady his breathing, but it was hard. Everything inside him felt alive. He spoke again, his tone firm but controlled. "How much do you make here, Amira?" Her head snapped up in surprise. "Sir, your salary," Damon repeated, his voice quieter now. "How much do they pay you?" Amira swallowed, unsure of what was happening. 150,000 naira a month, sir." Damon nodded slowly, his mind working furiously. He already knew the answer. He'd made sure to look up her salary and her background. But he needed to hear it from her lips. He took a step closer to her, his presence overwhelming. Amira's breath caught in her throat. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly unsure of where this conversation was going. "I see," Damon murmured. "And you have family, don't you? A sick mother, a sister." Amira's eyes widened in shock. "How do you know that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm the boss, Amira," Damon replied, his voice soft but authoritative. "I make it my business to know everything. I know you're the one who takes care of them." Amira's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. She had never felt so small, so exposed. She could feel Damon's eyes on her, reading her every thought, seeing right through her. He walked to the window, his back to her, and for a moment there was silence. "You want to help your family, don't you?" Damon asked, his voice colder now. "You want a better life for them, a better life for yourself." Amira didn't know how to respond. She was terrified, but something in Damon's voice made her wonder. This wasn't just a job for her, it was survival. She had been taking care of her sick mother and struggling to make ends meet for years. The salary she earned barely covered rent, let alone medical bills or her sister's education. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to help them." Damon turned around, his eyes intense. He stepped closer to her, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then I'm offering you something," he said, his voice now smooth and commanding. "A new position. You'll be my personal assistant. A very personal position." Amira's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a promotion, it was something more. The words hung heavy in the air. "You will be paid 5 million naira a month," Damon continued, his voice low, almost hypnotic. "And in return, you will be completely loyal. You will report to me and only me. What happens between us stays between us." Amira blinked, stunned by the amount he was offering. 5 million naira. It was a sum so large it felt like a dream. She could pay her mother's medical bills, put her sister through school, and have a comfortable life. But there was something about the way Damon was looking at her that made her skin crawl. Something she couldn't quite understand. What exactly do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Damon leaned in, his eyes dark and intense. "You'll assist me, Amira. You'll be by my side, helping me with whatever I need. Sometimes, I might need your help in other ways." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "Sometimes I get muscle cramps, a side effect of my condition." Amira looked at him, confusion clouding her mind. What did he mean by other ways? He reached out, his hand resting on the edge of his desk. "Right now, for example," he said, his tone almost casual. "I have a terrible cramp in my leg." Amira's eyes widened. You want me to help you?" Damon nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Help me up, Amira. Your hand." He held out his hand to her, a slight smile playing at the corner of his lips. Amira hesitated, her body stiff with uncertainty. Everything inside her screamed to refuse, to walk away from this strange and unsettling offer. But the money, the promise of a better life for her family, pulled at her. She had to think of them. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against his hand. As soon as her skin made contact with his, Damon felt the surge again. Stronger this time. A jolt of energy shot through him, and his body seemed to come alive. It was as if the last 5 years of numbness had been erased in a single moment. His heart raced, his mind spun. This wasn't just a touch. This was something else. Something that had the power to change everything. "Thank you," Damon whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Amira pulled her hand away quickly, stepping back in surprise. She felt a rush of heat flood her face, but she said nothing. She didn't trust herself to speak. Damon's smile grew, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "I need you, Amira," he said softly. "You're the only one who can bring me back to life."